So I've been watching through old Disney Plus shows and I finished Kenobi. I've got some thoughts on it, so let's get into it. So Kenobi was one of the most recent Star Wars series that came out in June 2022. Created a lot of buzz around that time. I actually did watch it in the summer of 2022. I just didn't get around to reviewing it since my channel was not up yet. So I actually finished watching it for the second time and I wanted to give my thoughts on the show. Obviously a lot of the actors like Ewan McGregor returning to the show. And another note is this will be a spoiler review. This thing's been out for almost a year. So I figured that most of you coming across this have watched the show, and if not, you've had plenty of time to do so. The premise of this show basically is that it takes place between episode 3 and 4 and features some of the events following Obi-Wan-Kenobi before the events of the New Hope, right? So let's first get into what I liked about this show. So what I did enjoy about this season of Kenobi is I do really like Ewan McGregor's version of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And you get him interspersed across the first 3 movies, you know, in Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith. But now we get a little more of him and we get to spend a little more time with this character. And I really do like that, right? Who doesn't like the Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan Kenobi? Especially if you're someone my age, you grew up with the prequel movies. Ewan McGregor is Obi-Wan Kenobi to you, right? And so I did like that we got to spend some time with him, get a bit of a deep dive into his character, get to show off more of his skills regarding the Force and lightsabers. And so that's just a definite plus. You just get to spend more time with these people, especially over 6 episodes. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And number 2, I think this is one of the most plausible Disney Plus Star Wars shows. They've had some of these Star Wars shows where it's like, it's kind of in this New Republic era, and then it's kind of over in this era and things like that. You're not really sure, you know, where this ties in, or does it matter? And does it tie in with the sequel trilogy? You don't really know. I feel like that the story that we get in Kenobi with him helping Leia, trying to rescue Leia, and eventually protecting Luke feels very plausible in the Star Wars universe. Now there's things that happen that I'm like, oh my, that does not seem canonical at all. That happens in this show, but at least it's plausible. You're like, yeah, Obi-Wan, he had, you know, 20 years between episode 3 and 4 for something to happen. Like who says that the Empire wasn't trying to track down Darth Vader's children, or things didn't happen in that meantime where he had to intervene? Of course, I think that's very definitely plausible. And in A New Hope, when Leia goes, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, right? It's implying that there's some form of history there, right? She knows him to some degree. And so expecting that maybe he had to go on a mission to help her, to, in this case, rescue her, I think is incredibly plausible. So I definitely think this is, like I said, a very plausible Disney Plus show. The history is implied there. It doesn't feel non-canonical for this show to happen during this era of Star Wars. And so I feel like that was a definite plus. It definitely filled in some gaps that I think were worth filling in. The next thing is we do get a bit of a picture of Darth Vader and his transition from episode 3 and 4, right? We're kind of halfway through between what the Darth Vader we see in episode 3, at the end of episode 3, and then what we get in episode 4. Like I said, we're about halfway there. And so we do get this interesting look into what Anakin Skywalker has become and what his leadership style is during that transition. And the show does a good job of sort of exploring the relationship between this fact that it's seen as Obi-Wan failing Anakin. He says at the end of episode 3, Anakin, I have failed you, implying that, you know, he failed him to a degree. He helped him become who he is now as Darth Vader. And get manipulated by Emperor Palpatine. And Obi-Wan is definitely feeling the impacts of letting that happen, letting the downfall of the entire Republic occur. Of course, it wasn't completely his fault. You know, in this case, there was a lot of factors that went into it. But he definitely feels responsible, giving the rise to Darth Vader, who has caused so much problems and caused so much death in the Old Republic, and the terror that and the tyranny that has now occurred under the New Republic, and sort of reeling from that and exploring from that. And I think it's a very interesting theme to dive into. I think that they were on the money there with that, and then exploring the relationship between him and Anakin. Anakin still having this hatred for Obi-Wan because he defeated him at the end of episode 3 in such a gruesome way as well. And you know, he was almost jealous of Obi-Wan because he thought, you know, whatever he thought was happening between him and Padme or whatever, you can use your imagination, but I really did like the thematic elements that they tried to explore. And so I do give them a lot of credit for that going into the show. However, I had a lot of problems with this show. Unfortunately, here's the things I didn't like. And number one, this show is a narrative mess. And I think this goes into the fact that this was supposed to be a movie, and I think it eventually got transitioned into being a show. And there was even a different script for it, and then the script got completely reworked. And you can tell the script has been through a trash compactor at this point, right? It's been through a lot of people. And by the end, we get this narrative mess where we're repeating plot points. We go to rescue Leia twice in the entire show. And it just feels like they didn't know what to do with it. And I think it speaks to the bigger problem of the 6-episode formula that Disney has described to doing. I think it was sort of masked in a show like Loki, which I'm doing a review of, or Hawkeye. I actually think it kind of worked in those. But in Obi-Wan, this did not work at all. This either needed to be a 10-episode season, or we can explore all these different things, such as the Inquisitors, exploring the deceased youngling and the Inquisitors and Obi-Wan's friend in the Senate and Leia and Luke and what's going on with them on Tatooine. There's a lot of interesting threads that could have ran through the show. And I think in a 10-episode season, it all could have been explored and all resolved in an interesting way. Inquisitors hunting Jedi after the fall of the Old Republic is an interesting plot point that I think I would enjoy watching, and Reva being a, thought to be deceased youngling now joining the dark side to hunt Jedi, and she survived, but she also hates Darth Vader because of what he did, is an interesting plot line. The fact that there's problems in the Senate and Leia has been kidnapped and Obi-Wan still has friends in this sort of dissolving republic. That's an interesting storyline. You have, Luke is on Tatooine and he's young and Obi-Wan's trying to protect him. That's an interesting storyline. Obi-Wan trying to deal with the fact that he helped contribute to the fall of the Republic. Another interesting storyline. So there's all these good things. And over a 10-episode season, all could have been developed, but we're in the 6-episode window. And so nothing gets developed. It's like we're swimming in the kiddie pool the whole time with this show. There's not enough time to do anything, but there's only enough plot to stretch it for a movie, like a 2 or 2.5 hour movie, but they're stretching it over 6 episodes. So the plot is stretched, but all these threads are deep enough for 10 episodes. So you just get this mess. You get this absolute narrative mess where you explore nothing, but all these things are set up and not tied up and resolved in any way that feels like it's satisfying to the audience. Because early on they imply Obi-Wan is, almost depressed because of what has happened with the Republic, and they sort of explore that, but they kind of just resolve it in one line in episode 3 or 4, where, basically saying you just got to move on, and then he's fine from there. And it's like, that's not a very satisfying conclusion. Or the fact that we get Reva, right, who was killed early or was hurt early on as a youngling, played dead, comes back, goes on to fight Darth Vader. She probably has one of the more satisfying arcs in the show, but she gets no punishment, or there's no consequences for her actions now as a Sith that she has become with the Inquisitors and killing and hunting Jedi. She gets off scot-free and rides off in the sunset. So there was no consequences there, right? It doesn't feel like there's any real consequences to any of these actions. To mention, I don't know if the writers had ever watched a scene of Star Wars before writing and directing the show, because there are so many scenes where there's just inexplicable action choreography. For example, there's a scene where Obi-Wan's going in to save Leia, and he has to hit a stormtrooper 3 or 4 times with a lightsaber to get through his armor. Never would you see that in the Star Wars universe. Or you have one of the rebel women, she punches a stormtrooper with her fist and knocks him out, although he's wearing armor, right? It doesn't make any sense. Or you have Darth Vader, he creates this fire, he's gonna drag Obi-Wan through this fire. So he's able to conjure fire in this situation, but then eventually Obi-Wan's able to escape beyond the fire, but then Darth Vader can't walk through it, and he can't walk around it, and he can't send stormtroopers after it. It doesn't make any sense. Or we have the fact that they're in the 2nd episode where they're being chased across the buildings, right? And Leia jumps off and pulls off a American Ninja Warrior move and grabs onto a wire, falling 20 feet, and then grabs it. It's like, that just is things that just strains the credibility of your show so much, and it takes me out of the experience. It takes me out of what I'm watching, going, this is just inexplicable narratively. This doesn't make sense. Like I said, or the fact that they have to rescue Leia twice in the show. When you notice these things, it diminishes your experience of the show. And so there are threads of something interesting here. I think the last episode of the show redeems it overall. In a sense, the last episode's probably the best episode. The first and 6 episodes are probably the best. And everything in the middle is just kind of a giant mess in my opinion. So in terms of overall, or in terms of an overview of the entire show, there's some decent things in here, but this was so much worse than it could have been. This could have been so much better. There was interesting things set up, but none of it resolved in a satisfying way, or none of it done in a way that makes sense. There's a lot of anti-canonical things in the show, a lot of weird, action, direction, and set pieces that happen, and I just feel like it didn't work. It just felt like a bit of a disaster, unfortunately, because I really like Obi-Wan, and I really like his character. They could have done a lot with this, and leave everything in the show. Leave all the characters in the show, even leave the bullet points of the plot in. It could have been done so much better, but it just felt cheap and rushed and poorly written. Anyways, I'm gonna give Obi-Wan a B-, unfortunately. Good enough, better on my second rewatch, but still, this thing should have been so much better, and it was overall pretty disappointing. So let me know in a comment down below, what do you think of this show? What do you think of Obi-Wan? Did you enjoy it? I hope maybe you enjoyed it more than I did, but I struggle with many aspects of this. I got plenty more reviews coming. You should like and subscribe to the channel. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time.